Before we do any presentation at Royal Roads, we always acknowledge that we live, learn, and work on the traditional lands of the Cosepsum and Lekwungen ancestors and families. Learning has been happening on the land of Royal Roads for far beyond the time that we've been there. We're very grateful to be there. And I also want to just take a quick minute to acknowledge that, of course, we are all in this wild time together that we are co-navigating, and Royal Roads is really about finding a way forward. We're very much about change making, which we'll get into in a little bit. But I know probably all of you who are considering school right now are thinking about what the future is going to look like and wanting to probably create something better than where we were before. And I just want to let you know you're in the right place, because that's what Royal Roads is about. And we are here to discuss the Master of Arts in Professional Communication and the Graduate Certificate in Professional Communication Management. I'm Alana McConaughey. I'm an Education Advisor at the university. I'm also a graduate and a student, so I'm well-versed in all things Royal Roads. And we also have some great folks here as well. So a couple of them which you can see. So we have Dr. Chaseten Remillard, who is the program head. And we also have recent grad Amanda Silvers, who is going to speak to you a little bit about her experience a little later on. And then we have a few people that you can't see. So we have my colleague, Christy, who is going to be helping out on the back end. And we also have Christine, who is an enrollment advisor, who's going to be watching out for your questions in the chat box. So with that, I would love to get a sense of who is in the room with us. So if you feel comfortable just typing into the chat box, just where you're watching in from, what kind of work you're up to, anything that you feel comfortable sharing, we'd love to get a sense of who's in the room with us. And as you do that, I will take you through what we're going to be up to over the next hour. So we're going to go through a really brief overview of the Royal Roads experience. I'll be taking you through that. And then Chasen's going to take you through the program specific information. And then we're going to talk to Amanda for a bit about her experience, and then we'll wrap up with the application process. But as I said, please do ask your questions as they come up. We'd love to hear from you. We will do a Q&A at the end. So just know we'll be going through all the program information just to make sure that everyone gets that. And then we will be answering your questions as we get to the Q&A session. So just to give you a sense, oh, I see a few people have typed in where they're watching them from. So we have Anne-Marie from Langley is looking forward to learning more about the MAPC. Welcome. And then we have Linda Epp from Whistler, who is her past employment has been with Work BC in education, specifically in Indigenous communities. We have Elena from Kelowna working in Arts and the Cultural Centre. We have Michelle joining from Victoria, working in the Government of BC, Strategic Planning, Social Development and Poverty Reduction. We have Emma from BCIT in Vancouver. We have Kat Trivers from Ottawa, who's working with Parks Canada. We have, I'm so sorry if I say this wrong, Adira, calling in from Prince Rupert, working in community relations, corporate communications, and the Port Authority. I have Mike from Prince George, work at the City of Prince George and media relations. Awesome. We have a great group of people here today. We also have Jackie from North Van, who's working for comms for TELUS. So lots of people who are already working in the industry. So, and it also shows there's a diversity of people coming in through this program with a lot of experience, which of course you will be learning from each other. We also have Karina here from Ottawa, currently working in public affairs for the Canadian Armed Forces. We have Tamara from Regina, working in the government of Saskatchewan as a social media officer with Sask Apprenticeship. Great. Awesome. Such a great group. Thank you to everyone who piped in. So Royal Roads, just as a quick overview. So you might already be familiar with this, but just in case you're not, we've been around for 25 years. So when we were created, it was with a government mandate to create a public university with a different type of mandate. So really about supporting working professionals to go back to school as they continue to work and get applied skills that they can actually take into their career. So right from the beginning, that was our mandate. And so we do a few things quite differently because of that. And I would say one of the big ones, we're really about community. So we run on a first first name basis. So one thing that I always like to mention is that I'm on degree number 2 and I don't know what my student number is. And I think that in itself is very, very unique. It's something that, you know, most of us, I'm sure, who've gone through other programs can still remember our student number, because that's usually how we're known in our entirety. But at Royal Roads, we want to know who you are, because you're going to be adding to our learning community. You're going to be, as you can see, everybody's going to be coming in with their own expertise, and we're co-creating knowledge together. So it is really about being on that first name basis, which takes me to learning together forever. So learning together forever is a reference to the cohort model. So we generally have pretty small cohorts. So I would say, I'll let Chase speak to this more directly, but 25 to 35 is generally where we max out. So you do get to know each other quite well. There's always an opportunity for working together. So most courses have a teamwork component to it. And that's for a number of reasons. For one, you know, teamwork is one of the non-technical skills that's essential for being successful in your career. So we really want to make sure that people get some great experience doing that. We have lots of support available for that, such as team coaches. There's lots of team building exercise that go into this as well. And also the fact that we can just create something bigger and better than we can on our own often, because we have people coming in with diverse skill sets. So obviously learning to collaborate in that way is wonderful as well, but also the relationship building that happens. You know, so many people that I've talked to say that they've come through this program and that they have created relationships that have lasted far beyond their graduation date. So really meaningful personal relationships, but also really advantageous professional relationships. So people can get jobs through connections that they make in their cohort or start businesses. I myself, I'm an interdisciplinary student, so I kind of jump between cohorts. And I would say that's the one thing that I kind of missed, is I didn't have that full cohort experience in my undergrad. But I certainly talk to lots of people who have that experience very directly and speak to it being one of the huge strengths of the program. And life is also an education. So this is speaking to the fact that we recognize that people learn in a variety of different ways, and our flexible admissions model is probably the best example of how we recognize diversity of learning. So I'll get into this in a little bit more detail, but it's basically where you can apply to a program using not only your education background, but also your professional background. So you have that opportunity. Perhaps you're someone who did a diploma and you've been working for 15 years and you're like, you know, I'd like to do some school, but I don't feel like I want to go back and finish my undergrad. I feel like I'm beyond that. So we will holistically assess you in that case. And I'll go through that into more detail at the end. And then our real world classroom. So as I said, it's very much about applied skills. All of our faculty are what we call scholar practitioners. So they've all either have extensive background working in the comms industry, or they're still working in communications in some capacity. So that's making sure that everything that you're learning, you're reading, all your assignments are very relevant. And anytime we have the opportunity for people to have actual impact with their education, so if you do a project that you can actually implement at work, we love that. And the designation that speaks to that is the fact that we're in Ashoka U ChangeMaker campus. So this is a designation that I believe about 55 institutions across North America have, and it's very much about bringing our learning beyond the walls of the institution. So if you haven't looked at this before, if you haven't heard of it, I invite you to check it out. And with that, so of course, we also have a physical landscape. We're very well versed at online learning. As you can see, we've been offering online learning since we began, because we've been a flexible model so that professionals can do their program as they work. But we also are on an incredibly beautiful landscape as well. So we're a National Historic Site as well as a university. So we have Hatley Castle, which has been there since the early 1900s, so maybe not as old as one would think. And then we are on Esquimalt Lagoon, so that's the view from the back of the castle, and just beyond that is the ocean. And we are also on 565 acres of old growth forest. So this isn't obviously a complete snapshot of the university's many other buildings and many other places to check out, but these are just some of the highlights. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Chase to get into the program information. You're muted.
You know, all that experience teaching online and it still happens. So yeah, my name is Dr. Chaseten Remillard. I am very happy to meet all of you today. I think I'm looking at the numbers. There's about 20 or so folks in the room, which is fantastic. And I really think it's a great opportunity for you to take advantage of having Amanda in the room and Elena and myself to ask some questions. It's so much easier to get, oh, and Christine and Christy as well, to get sort of, one-stop shop, get some answers to the questions that you might have about the program. So my background, I finished my PhD at University of Calgary, and I've been teaching actually in different institutions internationally and domestically since 1998. I've been the program head for 5 years for the undergraduate program, and then I recently moved into the role of being program head for the MAPC, the graduate program in professional communications, which you're interested in the summer. And so it's been I've been teaching in that program since I've come out to Royal Roads about 5 or 6 years ago. So it's been a really nice transition for me to start working more closely with grad students, and I've always enjoyed the graduate program from a teaching point of view, and now it's really nice to sort of see the architecture of the program and to see people through from start to finish, and it's really a unique program in Canada. I can tell you from somebody who's done grad work in communications that there isn't a lot of programs out there that focus on what, like Elena said, is the real practice of communications, as well as matching that with a really strong academic and robust understanding of the theory and the ideas behind it. So the program is 2 years, and it basically is sort of divided up into what we call like intensive 1, and then distance 1 and 2, and then intensive 2, and then distance 3. And so the intensives are when you are doing 3 courses at once or more than 1 course at once. So the first intensive that you do is when you first arrive into the program, we have you do 3 courses at the same time with your full cohort, and those are sort of the foundational courses that kind of puts everyone on the same page. So we do theory with you at that point. We do method with you at that point. So you get to learn what it means to do academic research at a graduate level, and what it means to come to the study of communications from the sort of theoretical understanding of what communications is. And then we also bundle that with the application side of things. So we have what's called an organizational comm challenge, which is in the course in one of our courses called organization communications. And in that you mobilize your knowledge around that you're learning in the theory and the method to solve a problem for a real organization that has come to Royal Roads that has asked us for their help with a particular communications issue. And so that's sort of intensive 1. And once you finish that, then you go into further courses, and I'll talk about those courses as we go forward. But then in a year's time, you come back and you do another intensive, and that's another opportunity for you again to have like that really strong cohort building. That's what really happens in those intensives, because you're there for 2 weeks. We run a 2-week sort of intensive period where it's sort of expected that you would maybe get time off work, and not be distracted, and in those 2 weeks you do the work, and you get to know everyone in your cohort. The courses run 9 weeks, but the intensive part of it is sort of where you're in class, in the virtual, because we're all on virtual now, but in the virtual classroom, for 2, maybe 3 sessions a day of sort of 60-90 minutes. And then after that, you have time at the end of the course to kind of finish things up. We have, the next slide, we have 3 different completion tracks. So we have the thesis completion track, which basically says you're going to do 24 course-based credits, which means basically you're going to do 8 courses, and those are the core courses. So you do all 8 courses that you can, and then you're given a release from being in the classroom for 12 credits to complete your thesis. So there's a certain time frame that you have to do that, and essentially it goes that basically once you get to intensive 2, which is in your second year, you have already determined that you're going to be in the thesis stream early on in about 6 months before you get to intensive 1. There's a process by which that goes through. You'll be given a supervisor. You'll have developed a strong proposal with supervision. And then after intensive 2, typically what happens is that folks go off, they collect their data, and then they have until the end of the program to complete and write their thesis. And then you do a defense and you graduate. For the research paper, it's sort of a halfway between the course-based and the thesis. For the research paper, you get you do 30 course credits, and then you have 6 that you do is the research paper. So we call it research paper, but it's sort of an extended project. It could be something that comes out of your work. It might be more applied, and the expectations for that is that it's significant research. It's important research. But it's not necessarily something that has to go to the level and the formalities and the sort of the examination steps that a thesis would have. So you don't have to do a defense for that. You don't have to have an external examiner look at that. So it gives you an opportunity to do really meaningful research. And again, you go through intensive 2, and then that kind of opens up the space for you to complete your research paper. So you're in the cohort, and then each sort of path takes a few people in different directions after that intensive 2. And then course-based is really for people who want the sort of structure of courses as they go through. They also want to maybe shop around and have to gather expertise. So you would complete all 36 of your credits through courses, and you can have the option of taking courses from other faculties at Royal Roads through interdisciplinary studies or leadership. And there's an approval process for that, but we basically have it pretty easy as long as the timing lines up and there seems to be a rationale for why you would want to take that course. So that allows you a lot of flexibility if you're interested in that path to kind of choose your own adventure in terms of getting some other courses under your belt that might be of interest to you. So there's a long list, and the next slide sort of talks about the different courses that we have. There's the core courses, which, like I said, are going to run through things like theory and method. They're going to be organizational communications. There's sort of a communications histories course, which is 540, which is sort of, what is communications and how does it interact with culture? And it brings it up, and we spend a lot of time talking about the digital communications environment that we're in right now, because that's important. And of course, understanding policy and law and politics around communications. There's a special topics course that you take, which right now is in communities of practice. And there's also applied research where you build your proposal, and there's strategic communication. So you can see that it gives you again that sort of constant kind of connection between the academic practice of studying communications and the practical application of those in real world environments, in a variety of different sectors. And then there's the next slide talks about the electives, and we have all kinds of different electives that actually within the program we offer, and depends on the year, depends on, instructor or professor availability, but you either are going to have, depending on what stream, if you're in the research paper or if you're in the course space, you're going to have more of these to play around with, but they're much more sort of focused on things like media production, or maybe digital, maybe conflict management, development and change, sustainability, organizational design, cultural development. And again, then we have one that sort of floats, which is special topics, and that might change from year to year. So you can see why there's appeals to different streams to different people. Some people really want to dig deep into one topic, and that would be the thesis. Some people, they want to kind of have a hybrid where they get to do some applied research, but they also want to have a little bit more variety in the courses that they get. And then there's some folks who really want to just have a real breadth of understanding of what communication, and then that would be the course based. And those are sort of the three different ways that it happens. And everyone starts at the same time. They continue through the program all the way through the cohort, but at some points there's sort of different off ramps for folks when they're on the different streams. And that intensive 2 is really is sort of the point in which everyone comes back together one more time. And then at that point, the sort of individual pathways lead in different directions as people finish their degrees. And then everyone finishes at the same time, regardless of what path you take. You're all within that same two-year frame. And so, where have people gone with this degree? They've gone all over the place. I revised this slide because it was just a wall of text. It was just like, it was like 10-point font. And then it was just, communications manager. And it was just like, there was like probably 25 lines of different occupations. And really, I think what I did is I said, there's so many different sectors through which communications is important, and it's growing. And I would actually argue that probably a degree in communications is going to be one of the degrees that is most valuable going forward. I mean, you look at politics nowadays, like it or disagree with it. You could look at politicians' use of social media. You look at the fact that communications officers and communications folks are so prevalent in politics now, especially in places like the United States, that you have a politician like Trump who basically uses Twitter as his connection with his voting population, and doesn't even use traditional media hardly at all. You look at the pandemic, and you look at the changes that's happened now because of communications with the pandemic, and the importance of communications, and that health officers are really communications officers. I mean, that the politicians are managing not only information, disinformation, but they're also managing crises, the speed at which crises spread, and the impact of crises that crisis has on organizations. Think of Boeing, the management of that, not only just as an actual event and as a problem with their technology, but the brand that needs to now be rebuilt. And so we live in an environment where we're so connected with each other, and that we really can't escape the importance of communications. So people who have this expertise are going to have opportunities to work in all kinds of different sectors. And that's been our experience. We have people who go on to do PhDs. We have people who go on to work in their local communities. We have people who work at highest levels of government. We have people who work at municipal levels of government. We have people who are community communicators. We have people who are digital. We have people who are publishers. We have people who run their own shops and consultancies. We have people who go back to higher education and become instructors or professors. We have people who work in the creative industry, and they work in film and documentary film, or they work in photography or digital creation, right? So there's all kinds of different routes that this degree allows for. And you can see, again, part of it is that once you get in, you can kind of choose the path. You can take media production if that's something that's interesting for you. You can do a thesis that's a documentary film. That's something that's possible. You can focus, like Amanda did, on leadership and communications on social media, because that's something that's important to her professionally and is a direction that she finds interesting, right? So you can really tailor this and go in the direction and dig deep into those areas that you think are going to be worthwhile for you. And all the while you have us supporting you, right? And Elena's right. Like we are folks that we live and breathe this every day. We do this every day. We love it. Like it's something that jazzes us up. Like I'm always excited to teach. I'm always excited to be in the classroom and to meet people. And it's just something that motivates us. And that's a really big difference than other universities where profs are strictly, a lot of times, not focused on teaching. They're focused on their own research, and they're focused on getting their publications out. It's not that we don't publish, we do. It's that we publish and we teach, and we enjoy teaching. It's a student centered, it's a learning centered institution. And it's strange, but the selection process and the hiring process just kind of brings like-minded people together, and the ethos of the place really just reinforces that. We're, that you call your professors by first name is not just sort of a throwaway kind of thing. You do that in other grad programs, but the proximity that you have with your profs is quite different. And you get to really benefit from them and their expertise. So that's the grad, that's the MAPC program. And I know there might be some folks in here who are interested in the graduate certificate. So I'll just speak very quickly about that, and we can answer questions. But essentially, there's 3 courses. They run in the same. We put the grad cert right into the program, so we don't have a separate like continuing ed department, right? It's that you come in with the folks in the MAPC, which is great because there's cross pollination. People in the grad cert are oftentimes working, and so they might have their ear to the ground in different ways. It's a good networking opportunity for people to meet other people, and we run it in the same intensive 2 that we do all the other courses. So you take strategic communication, you take conflict analysis, you take strategic digital communication. You take all those courses in the 9-week period, and you also get the intensive period as well of the 2 weeks. So you're treated just like just like every other grad student. You are essentially in the exact same classes as our grad students. And so what that allows you to do is have a really strong connection with the material. This isn't just like a kind of learn at your own pace continuing ed in the evenings course. This is a full-on legit graduate course that you get, and you take those 3 together and you get your certificate. And of course, if you choose to come into the MAPC or any other, there's a couple of other programs that we have at Royal Roads that you can use these credits towards. So it's also an opportunity to kind of get your feet wet and say, this is for me, or it's not for me. And yes, it is. And actually, I would like to go in. And then you have that under you. You already have those credits, and they're applicable. So it's a great opportunity for people who are kind of wondering whether or not grad school is the right fit for them. But it's also something that really gives you a really strong connection to the material and to a real great network of people doing the kind of work that you're doing, but from all over Canada. So it's also a really interesting and great opportunity. And so I'll be quiet now and turn it over to Amanda. Amanda, I'll just say, full disclosure, was a thesis student of mine, and she did an excellent thesis on leader, like I mentioned, on leadership and social media and BC Transit. And so, yeah, thanks, Amanda, for coming, and I'm happy to answer questions later on.
Thanks for inviting me.
Amanda, I'm wondering if we can get a little bit of your professional background before we dive into the questions. That might be helpful for folks just to know, because I know you have a transition that's happened lately. So just where you've been and where you are now.
Okay, well, I grew up in the Lower Mainland. I still live here. I did my undergrad at UVic in English and History and Art back in the 90s, and followed that with the 2-year marketing management program at BCIT in the communications concentration. So then I spent 20 years, before coming to Royal Roads, I spent 20 years practicing in the field and as a communicator. I started out in shopping and mall marketing that lasted a very short time because it wasn't my passion. And I went into not-for-profit to charitable marketing for a few years. I was at the YMCA Vancouver, and then, or sorry, the YWCA Vancouver, and then the Surrey Memorial Hospital Foundation. And then I went to the city of Surrey, which is where I spent I spent 10 years. I spent a decade there as a communicator. And after 10 years there, I was ready for a change. I was feeling a bit stuck in my career. I had I'd always wanted to go back to grad school. It was sort of on my, we had changed the landscape of communications. Like I did BCIT in the 90s, right in the late 90s, prior to the digital revolution, and so much had changed. And I felt like I sort of knew I was tactically going through, in terms of doing my communication, I was approaching things tactically and didn't really understand. I didn't feel like I understood the whole the new landscape of communication. And so I had the opportunity to take this program. It was sort of a door opened in my personal life, and I was able to take the MAPC program. And as Chase mentioned, I loved it. And then I finished in November, but in August, I did make a career change, and I am now with Fraser Health. So I'm doing what Chase was mentioning about like being working in the pandemic in communications and figuring that all out as we go. And boy, oh boy, it's super interesting and meaningful and at times stressful, but yeah, so that's me.
Thank you so much. What a journey through communications you've been on.
Yes.
Amazing. Okay, I'm just going to dive right in. I also want to mention, if other folks who are watching have questions, please feel free to type them in. Amanda's happy to ask any individualized questions, but I have some questions laid out. So I'm going to start with what drew you to Royal Roads and this program specifically?
Well, so back to, I had these big burning questions. So I'm somebody, I like to and that's what took me into the thesis, deciding to go into thesis track in the program. It's because I really wanted to get that understanding. Like I did BCAT, and BCAT armed me with such great practical skills to kind of hit the ground running in my career at an entry level. But all these years later, and with so much change in our field, I was feeling like I wanted to get that depth of understanding. I wanted to understand the theory. I wanted to understand what the best practice is and like how to navigate like our whole digital, the landscape has turned communications essentially on its head from my perspective. And I really wanted to understand that. And so I loved the way that this program sort of married the two, the academic and the practical, which really appealed to me.
Awesome, thanks. Did you have any concerns before you started the program around going back to school?
Hugely, as I just work-life balance is always and so that was one of the things that kept me from going back to, honestly, of taking something like this on, because I'm a mom. And so, but I decided that I was going to do it. And as I said, I had some changes in my personal life, I was able to do it. And it was great. But I did. It was because it's a big commitment. Like it is a big commitment. I'm not going to lie. And the folks, because what I did is I actually left the city of Surrey and started to I did some of my own consulting. But in consulting, I was able to, so I left for a couple of years and did consulting. And so I was able to really manage the contracts, the work that I took to make sure that I could manage my home life, manage my work life. And the folks, there was tons of people in my cohort that were full-time, like big jobs, doing the degree, had kids, like did all, and I say like props to them, because that was definitely something that weighed on me in taking something like this on.
In terms of how you benefited from the program, can you speak to that a little bit, both personally and professionally?
Well, I loved going back to school after 20 years. It was such a different experience from my undergrad, when I really just wanted to get through and finish and get that, that degree under my belt. Um, Whereas this, like, I was such a nerd, like I just nerded out. I just loved it. I loved it all. I loved getting into it and understanding it and asking questions. And like Chase said, having the accessibility of the professors, like it was just so, that part, like the learning itself. I loved how self-directed it actually, I found, you can make it. There's so much choice that you within the program of what you focus on. So you really can take your interests and apply your learning, like apply the course itself to what you are interested in. So that was great. And I made some really awesome friends. Like I really did. One of them is like a super close friend of mine. She always will be. She was a thesis student as well. And she also did her thesis with Chase. Chase was her advisor. And professionally, like I said, I felt like I was stuck when I was in my job at the city, and I transferred essentially. I mean, it's still government. I'm still working in government, but I'm in a whole new sector, going into healthcare, which is, so I made that jump. And I know that doing my master's like that was it's a big boost on speaks, I think, a lot to people who take that on and do that.
Thank you. I'm just noticing a comment here from Kat saying, your story resonates, Amanda. I'm feeling that way too. Thank you for sharing, bridging the gap between practical and big picture.
And do you know what, Kat, when I was doing the research, I actually loved, one of the things I loved about doing the program is that you get access in the library to all the research catalogs, like in all the in the university, these huge online research catalogs. You can look all kinds of things up. It doesn't just have to be communication. You could dive into research of whatever you want. And one of the things that came up in a lot of my research, not just my out of interest research, but even my school research, was research talking about the gap between research and practice and how to bridge that gap. And it goes across sort of sectors like that, and I see it in my own workplace and in my own work experience of just how to bring, there's so much good stuff that is coming out, and especially in our evolving digital world that is coming out, and how do we make sure that information gets to the practitioners? And so this program is great for that. Yeah.
Speaking of research, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about why you chose the thesis track and what your area of research was.
I mostly chose thesis because that I was scared of it, and I wanted to prove to myself that I could actually do it. Because it seemed like a really, really big, scary thing to take on. And it was a big thing to take on. There were holy smokes. There was some times where I was just like, this is crazy. But because so when Chase talked about how you sort of, if you're a thesis student, you're on your own for the last part of the program, completing your research. You do it, it's self-directed. And the pandemic hit just as we were sort of really started go. And so the world kind of went crazy, and I'm supposed to be trying to focus in on, I did my research with TransLink, so the transportation authority in the Lower Mainland. And even just that, like I was supposed to have interviews with them like in person, and the pandemic hit and the shutdown happened, and those had to go online, and so all this kind of stuff. So it was a bit of a crazy time. But so my area of research was to do with, I'm really interested in how to influence, how to break through the noise at this, especially from our trusted institutions, from government. Because there's so much, like Chase, talking about what's gone on with Trump and what's happening in the States, and how that affects us and the way that we communicate as well, like globally, but certainly in Canada. And so I wanted to look at Twitter and how to influence in Twitter. And so I decided to take a case of the CEO, the incoming CEO of TransLink in 2016 was brought in to essentially help them recover from the failed transportation plebiscite. Their reputation had been had been trashed. And what the experience his on Twitter, and how his the way that the frame that TransLink put on him versus the conversation that was coming out from TransLink followers and the stakeholders, and taking a look at those two and analyzing that. So that was my area of research.
So cool. Was it something you were able to offer to them in any way? Like,
yeah, I sent it to them there. I gave it to them at the end of it. They were great because I did do the interviews. I did go meet the VP of comms, and he was great to say, like, will you help me out here? And they put me in touch with one of their data scientists who was able to give me 330,000 historic tweets that had tagged at TransLink. So I had to go through all that to look for the data that I was looking for. There was all like my method was sort of a very all over the place trying to figure out how to do it. So that was an interesting learning experience for me going through that. But the bottom line that's interesting for maybe the people who are listening, because I know that it's a professional audience, is that if you're ever the biggest takeaway that I took from my research is that if you're ever advising leadership on how to influence, is to get speaking engagements. So which isn't great for pandemic right now, but in-person speaking engagements with the right audience really does appear, from the limitations of my findings, appears to result in a lot of positive sharing of messaging. So not just it extends beyond the room, the room of the speaker, and really is shared out into Twitter a lot.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So cool. So cool. Okay. In terms, I know you already mentioned that you still are in touch with at least one person from your cohort, but I'm curious just about the cohort experience and if you're still in touch with multiple.
We're in touch. We have an unofficial Facebook group that one of our members signed up, and we're still on there. Like, at least I put something. Oh, I posted something just the other week about that. I don't know if you all saw the BC Ferries mask campaign. It was hilarious. You'd have to go look at it. I won't go into it. But they did this mask campaign anyways. It was an example of sort of an oops in graphic design. And so it made it to the James Corden show, actually. But I posted that in our Facebook group for a laugh and an example of a communications mishap. They dealt with it beautifully, actually, but in terms of crisis.
One thing that I know you graduated recently, so you might not be able to speak to this, but I'll bring it up because I just have heard it a lot through other alumni and people in the MBA program, that I definitely think it would be true for the MAPC as well, is because you have people coming from kind of, diverse backgrounds of communications, and you make these connections with them, and generally people do stay in touch. You end up getting a lot of free consulting is what I hear. Like, if you
Yes, people do. Some of my the cohort, I've seen people say, like, anybody know who do you use when you need a survey, like in the Vancouver area, or what have you, like, does anybody have any templates for blah 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 blah, and yeah, so there is people, we do use it for that as well. And we have my cohort, we were stretched right across the country, so we had, there was definitely lots of people from BC, but we had folks all the way out from somebody from Halifax all the way to the East Coast. Yeah.
Awesome. So my final question for you is if you have any advice that you would give to a future MAPC student.
The only advice I would say is just to, as much as you can give it, as much as you can invest into it, you'll get out of it. That was really what my experience with it was. It's just that I know that there's definitely some periods of time where it feels overwhelming and all that kind of stuff. But in the end, you're going to look back and you're just going to be like, that was so great. Like, that was so worthwhile. And you'll learn so much. It'll make you, you think that the learnings that come out of it are awesome.
I so love that your answer to why you did the thesis track, because I think it speaks to kind of the advice you're giving is you did it because you were afraid of it and you wanted to challenge it. And I just think that is, like, for me, that is why I do the work that I do with Royal Roads. Is that I think that you know, for people going back to school, especially often later in life, you know, it's a scary thing, but it's really about like kind of coming up against your own self-imposed limitations and pushing past that.
Absolutely. And proving to yourself that you know, Stuart Smalley was that, I don't know how young the audience is, but from Saturday Night Live, that old Saturday, Al Franken, and he was like, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough. And doggone it, people like you, it's just that self, like feeling like I can totally do this. And this program did that for me. Like it was very validating. The experience was really validating. I went back to school and I was like, I'm determined to like learn so much and to like totally rock this. And because I was determined, I did it. And it feels great on the other side of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you.
Oh, and I wanted to say to the folks who are in on this call, you can find me on LinkedIn. If afterwards, if you do have questions, like please reach out. I'm happy to answer any.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Okay. Well, Amanda's going to stay on. So I'm just going to quickly go through the application process and then we'll go into Q&A. So do kind of think of any questions you have regarding either the program that Chase can answer or questions from more the experiential end that Amanda can answer. And with that, so the standard admission process is the completion of a 4-year undergraduate degree in a relevant field from a recognized post-secondary institution. And then we're asking that you have, you can demonstrate that you have the knowledge, skills, and ability to complete a demanding academic course at a master's level. And we are looking for normally at least 2 years of work or volunteer experience to come into this program. But I think that generally people are coming in with quite a bit more, but you know, just to have that practical understanding, it is really important that you've worked in some area of communications to be able to kind of apply what you've experienced to your learning. And then of course, flexible admissions, I had mentioned this earlier, this is a wonderful offering for those individuals who maybe don't have a full undergrad, but they have a number of years of work experience. So it's case by case, so there's a variance and depending on how much education you have, but generally if you have more than 3 years, we're looking for at least 3 years of work experience and preferably at a leadership capacity. And then for applicants with 2 to 3 years, we'll be looking for 5 years of relevant work experience in a leadership capacity. And then for applicants with less than 2 years, we'll be looking for individuals who have 10 years of high-level professional communication experience in a leadership capacity. So this is, you know, this is a wonderful offering, and I have to say that people who come through this model, it can be, you know, even a little bit extra intimidating, I think, for the flexible admissions because maybe you don't have a full undergrad, but you're, you know, bringing in lived experience is really, really valuable to the cohort as well. So if you are considering this or you know someone who would be a great fit for this, do connect with one of our enrollment advisors. Christine's on the call. They can definitely walk you through this process and help you decide if this is going to work for you. And something to consider as well, this is both for people coming through flexible admissions and for individuals who just haven't been in academia for a while. We do have an academic writing and critical thinking course. So there's a number of dates. I think that Christine will add those links into the chat box, but this is a course that will basically prep you for academic writing. So if you've been doing professional writing for a number of years, APA writing is very different. So, you know, I've never heard anybody say they regret taking this course. It's definitely a great way to kind of get a leg up and get you prepared for writing in this way. And once you're ready to apply, there is an online application fee of $126.28, and then you can start submitting your documents. So we'll need your official transcripts coming sealed, detailed resume. So the detailed resume is not your typical CV. It's a multi-page document that will outline all of your work experience, volunteer experience, non-credential education, anything that you think is relevant. Definitely, if you think it at all we should know about it, include it. Don't leave it out. It can be, you know, these can be several pages long. And your personal statement. So this is really about distilling the reason why you want to come into the program. On the website, there is some questions that are asked to help you kind of come through this, but this is a really great practice of just like, why do you want to do this program? What are you hoping to get out of it? What are you going to be bringing into the cohort? And it's something that I really have enjoyed doing for my programs. And it's something you can go back and read, you know, when you're halfway through and you're in the midst of research and just remembering why you wanted to do this in the first place. And then the 2 letters of reference. So ideally there's one academic and one professional coming to us, but if you've been outside of academia for a number of years, we will accept 2 professional. They just need to come through a professional letterhead or professional email. And in terms of dates, so for the Master of Arts in Professional Communication, the next intake is on May 3rd, and the current application deadline is January 26th. So if you are considering this intake, it would be good to get your application started. We do rolling admissions, so the sooner you get in all your documents, the sooner you'll find out. It generally takes 6 to 8 weeks to find out if you've been accepted in the program. And then we do have another intake in September, and the application deadline is currently June the 13th. And then for the grad certificate, there is an intake in May, and the application deadline is currently February 17th. So again, if you're considering that, it would be good to get going on that. And then financial aid, so lots of support available for financial aid, lots of bursaries available that you can explore. Again, I think that Christine will be adding these links into the chat box. And also, if you want to just look at tuition schedules, that's a good way to kind of wrap your head around how the financing is going to work. You can see how that's what it's going to look like in terms of every term and that sort of thing. And you can also reach out to them through phone or email. And enrollment services, as you can see, Christine is very keen to help. She's been adding lots and lots of links and would love to connect with you. So we have our enrollment team for domestic up top. And then if you're coming in internationally, there is the enrollment services email down there. And with that, I'm going to pull down the PowerPoint and we're going to go into the questions. So, Chase, have you seen any off the top that you want to tackle? Okay. We have a question from Mike. Should I just read it out loud? Okay, so looking at the MA versus the GC curriculum, because the course names don't appear to match, can you elaborate a bit on how the courses transfer from the grad certificate to the MA, Chase? Oh, are you? Okay, you should be able to unmute now.
Okay. Yeah, I think you moved me into the main group or something. So, sorry. What the question was? The grad cert names are different than the MAPC names.
Well, yeah, and I think more specifically, I'm just talking about how that works in terms of transfer credits, like transferring the grad certificate into the MA.
Right in.
Yeah.
It's like
so
that. Easy.
Here would be a follow-up question. If you were to get accepted into the grad certificate, would you automatically be accepted into the master's program, or you'd have to reapply?
That would be a better question for Christine, but I think still have to go through the formal. I don't think we have the same specific requirements for the grad cert as we do for the MAPC. But if you get accepted into the MAPC, whatever you've done in the grad cert is applicable to that. And I think there was a question earlier that she dropped in an answer to, and it said that just off the top of my head, I think that you can use those credits for the Masters in Interdisciplinary Studies and also the Masters in Leadership Studies. So it isn't just that you would be able to just go into the MAPC. You could take the grad cert and then take those credits and go to another program at Royal Roads. We would be hurt. Like, we would be like, why are you betraying us after that? What did we do? But we would understand it was a personal choice. But so it does give you a lot. It does give you 9 credits, but you're still subject to apply. I think Christine, if you could just confirm that, but I believe that's the case.
Okay. And in terms of like there was another question about the cost. It would basically, because you're paying per credit, So, you know, you would be paying for them, if you went on to do the master's, you'd be paying what the master's cost less the grad certificate cost, correct?
Yeah, you pay per you pay per course, right?
Yeah, perfect. The next question is, what kind of research is currently happening within the program, either by faculty or students? Can you give some good examples?
Great question.
Yeah.
So, wow, like all kinds of stuff. First of all, you know, I think we have, I just got to, I mean, Philip Vanini, Dr. Vanini is kind of like, he's legitimately Indiana Jones. Like I've never met in my life like a professor that matches that kind of stereotypical, or not stereotypical, but like that sort of idea of the, you know, the leather jacket wearing, globe trotting professor like Dr. Vanini. So he's a public ethnographer. He's a documentary filmmaker, and he basically goes, I think his last project was kind of like Where the Wild Things Are, and he goes to these places where there's very little human impact, but they're still humans, and he interviews the people who live in these very, very wild places. So he'll literally like call in on a boat traveling from Japan to some island that no one's ever heard of in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and be like, I'm just on my way to this, and I'm just, you know, that's where he's at. So he's doing all kinds of really interesting things. He publishes a book about every year or so, and makes you can find his documentaries on Apple, or I don't know if they're on Netflix. I think they might have made it onto Netflix, but you can definitely find him doing stuff. Then you have you have Dr. Jennifer Wallinga. She's a former Olympic athlete. She was won the gold medal for rowing, and so she does a lot of really interesting things about leadership, women in leadership, women in communications, community of practice, sports communication. Dr. Gio Takash, he's also a filmmaker. He's also a playwright. He's published a couple of books on environmental communication and sustainable communication. He's right now working with Russ Johnston at the Indigenous Center for Learning at Royal Roads, and they're building a course called Indigenous Communication in Indigenous Contexts. So he's really connected into sort of a reconciliation and the ways in which environmental communication overlap with these discourses in public space in Canada around Indigenous groups and Indigenous nations and so on. So he's really, that's where his research has taken him. Dr. Zhang-Yi Li, he does a lot of really interesting things on health and death and dying. He's intercultural, and so we joked about doing a project, him and I, on flying drones over cemeteries and like looking at the ways that cemeteries are different in different cultures. But we haven't been able to do that, but that's kind of the, that we were sort of saying that we would do that. The research that I do is in crisis communication, visual communication, social media. So I just published a paper, which, and that's the other thing, is that you can, we oftentimes hire people to work as research assistants. So research assistant worked with I had two MA students as research assistants, and then the three of us collaborated on a chapter on Justin Trudeau and selfies, which just came out about a year ago. We just did a really cool autoethnography, which is basically that you use your own self as a research. There was a team of us, of 4 of us. We did one on the masks at the first wave of the pandemic. I was just chatting with the co-author today, and I'm like, we need to do a second one because masks are so much different now than they were in the first. So we're looking at that, and let's see who else. Students, they do all kinds of stuff. I mean, I couldn't even, we've had people, you know, just for, let's say I could speak to the students that I've supervised in terms of theses. Like I had a student do a documentary film on food safety, and she did an ethnography. She talked to people who are dumpster divers. There's like there's a dumpster dive. I didn't know this, but there's a dumpster diving society at UVic. And so she went and interviewed all the people who they don't need to dumpster dive because of financial reasons. They choose to. And so they have, every week they have a potluck of all the stuff that they've found in the dumpsters around Victoria. And so she interviewed all those people and created a documentary. You know, Amanda talked about her project with social media and leadership. I think it's Natasha who you're talking about, who also was a student, thesis student of mine. She did hers on the visual communication of electric cars, and like how they present, you know, present electric cars as a kind of plausible alternative to gasoline cars and so on. So more marketing. So it's a really broad base of projects and research. Great question.
Thanks so much for that. I do want to note we're just a little bit after 1. I see a lot of people are dipping out. Totally, if you need to leave for a meeting, we're just going to be on for another minute here. But thank you for staying with us, and yeah, please reach out if you have any questions. I did want to mention, Chase was talking about some of the research that's been happening. We've actually been doing a series of webinars over these last months from the School of Communication and Culture. So there's a number, we have a webinars on demand page, and I will add it to the follow-up email so that you can find it. But you can watch the recordings of that one on the mask that we did. So if you are interested in the topic, it happened in July. So yeah, things have evolved since then, but still I think very relevant, the perspectives that were brought into that conversation. We also have Jennifer Lewinga is doing a sport leadership and social change webinar series, and we're going to be doing episode 2 on Wednesday, I believe. So I will be putting the registration link in the follow-up as well. So please do join us for that. But that's a great way to kind of get looped into some of the research and some of the passions that are happening with the faculty in the School of Communication and Culture, because they are an extremely passionate group of people, and they're doing a ton of collaborative work. So some really great, interesting topics that you can explore. I think that we wrapped up for all the questions. I don't know if any other ones weren't caught, but you know, if you do have a question that wasn't answered, you can always reach out to us directly. Yes, and Dr. David Black, he did one on fake news and conspiracy theories. So that is definitely on the list as well. But yeah, thank you everyone. Reach out if you do have any more questions. We're always happy to support you in whatever way you need. And we hope that we'll hear from you all soon. And thank you, Amanda, so much for joining us. We so appreciated getting your perspective. Yeah, and thanks Chase and Christy and Christine, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
See you.